Beautiful. And as we keep doing that, I think I would love to just open us up with a reflection question, and then I'll go over the agenda. But folks are going to use the chat for this, and I'm happy to read them out as they get into the chat, so folks watching at home can see. Actually, I should probably just introduce myself for anybody that's new to this space or listening from home. I'm Sarah Lentz. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm chair of the board and chairing this committee. So to kick us off tonight, I would love if folks could put in the chat what part of this work have you been thinking about since our last meeting? And you can just put those into the chat and I will read them out loud. Thinking about what that first scenario might look like? Yeah, me too. McKay, I hope. No pressure, McKay. What else? What else have people been thinking about? Welcome, Dr. Warren. Got Katie Lamb from Transportation, Ben from Transportation. Great. So other things people are thinking about, possible scenarios and how to get public input on the pros and cons. Yeah, I've been hearing a lot in the community about how the community input is going to work on this. Thinking about what data should and shouldn't be considered based on if it was relevant to the work or not so relevant. It's really good thinking too. Ways to update our map with the enrollment team and transportation. Accountability and coming to a recommendation that works for Portlanders. Yeah. Data and impact on community, building McKinney-Vento into our plans. Yeah, all of those things are big things. None of those are small. And I think that is really what I've been thinking about, is really the scope of this work and the impact on the community. For sure. But thank you for all the time that you've spent thinking about this in between now and then. Tonight, we have a couple things that we're going to do. So in our last meeting, we talked a lot about language, both in really coming up with those considerations that we'll use as we get closer to our recommendations, and then around a couple words within those recommendations. So neighborhood schools was one of the things that we talked a little bit about last time. And I think that there was kind of universal consensus around that, that we needed to come up with a definition of what that term means to this group so that we're all really using the same lens as we get closer to those recommendations. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on that tonight, coming up with some possible definitions for neighborhood schools. And then we're going to be talking about hazard zones in Portland. And Dr. Warren and Ben LaSavoy will be talking a lot more about hazard zones, what they are, where they exist in the city, and then we'll do kind of a group think exercise to identify any hazard zones that might have been missed. And the next part of that is just thinking about our walking guidelines. We barely touched on that last time, but thinking about how far should a student have to walk to school in elementary school and middle school, and depending on what that length is, how does that impact transportation? So that's where we're gonna, that's the plan for tonight. Before we jump into neighborhood schools, is there any questions, or are there any questions about this? Okay, I'm not seeing any Zoom hands, so I'm going to assume there's no questions, but like always, feel free to use the chat. If you do have questions, you can send a message directly to me, or McKay, or Dr. Scallon is probably helpful too. So let's go ahead and get started. And actually, what I would love to do here is to put us in smaller groups. And Dr. Warren, would it make sense, can we use transportation staff in those small groups, or would you rather us keep the transportation team out of the small groups to work on the definition of neighborhood schools?
Ben and Katie, are you happy to be part of the groups? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's
awesome.
great.
Yeah,
Okay,
no
beautiful.
problem.
I think that would be really helpful too. So, oh, and I'm just realizing we don't have all the Zoom permissions that we usually have. Um, uh, Someone from PPS, we can't do breakout rooms in a webinar format, can we? Is that what's happening? I'm going to assume that's what's happening.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Okay, that's fine. I'll pivot. I just didn't even think about that. My other kind of facilitation I do, I'm not usually using webinars, so apologies for that, but I think we'll be okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put the link to the Miro board in the chat for everyone to be able to access. And great, I see folks are coming on in. So what I would love for us to do right now is brainstorm a little bit about what a neighborhood school is. Okay, so oh, great, good work, everyone, getting into Miro. And we're going to use these blue sticky notes over here. I'm going to bring everyone to me. Yep. There you go. We're going to use these blue sticky notes to start brainstorming what a neighborhood school is. So if you're feeling really confident in Miro, you can double click on those blue stickies. Or if you're not feeling so confident or having technology issues, you can put something in the chat and I can add it to a blue sticky. But right now, what we're going to do, just start writing down what you think a neighborhood school is. And I can make more stickies if we need them. You just let me know what you need. Well done. And again, if Miro isn't working for you for whatever reason, feel free to use the chat. And I can put this into a sticky for you. Awesome. Yeah, awesome. I think some people are working on full definitions. Some people are just maybe adding like one attribute of a neighborhood school. Both of those techniques are totally fine and appreciated. And if you need more than one sticky, take more than one sticky. And I think what's cool about the definitions that I'm seeing here is we're seeing both kind of like philosophically, what is a neighborhood school, and also very, tactile or logistically, what is a neighborhood school? And I would just encourage more of that thinking as well on both sides of that. Beautiful. And when you're done typing in your sticky, if you want to click outside of it so that I know you're done, that would be helpful. It'll take that gray screen off your sticky once you're done. Beautiful. You can keep working on it. If you need to. So I'm seeing some commonalities here of things that are coming up. So we've got walking, biking, reasonable distance. As you're looking at these stickies that are up here, if you have a question about what someone has written, you can come off mute and ask it. I'm curious, the person who wrote an anchor of neighborhoods accessible by surrounding neighborhoods. I'm curious about that word anchor. What does that mean to the person that wrote it?
That was me, Sarah. Um, I know, like, our neighborhood school. I mean, you can see our neighborhood school from the end of our driveway, but that's where like meetings are after school. So there's the part where it's accessible by the neighborhood is like the student part, but then also the which is what we're talking about. But then the anchor part's more of the it's a place where there's meetings after school, whether it's neighborhood committees or Cub Scouts or pick up basketball or whatever.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Any questions about these other stickies? I have another question then. Where the school looks like kids in the neighborhood, what does that mean?
That was me. And that might bridge to my own question. So I think to me, a neighborhood school means that the demographics of the student population are similar to the demographics of the neighborhood, however you want to define it. But I have a question about, I guess, why are we, and I maybe because I joined a little bit late, sorry, I had to pick up my kid from school.
It happens,
Yeah, I was wondering why we're focusing on neighborhood schools in that definition, like why are prioritizing that?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to come back to that. So last meeting, we we flagged a couple of terms as needing to have a community definition around those because they're part of the considerations that we'll use when we get closer to our recommendations. And neighborhood school came up as one that we needed to all have the same understanding of what it was. So that's why we're just spending a little bit of time at the top of this meeting coming up with a shared definition.
Cool. And so it's not necessarily that the goal is neighborhood schools, but if that is our goal, what does that mean?
Correct. And I'll just skim us back here to these. Sorry if you get motion sickness, to this list of considerations, right, that we kind of came to a summary to last time. So balancing the utilization, balancing socioeconomic, linguistic, and racial diversity, working to maintain neighborhood schools. So this is where it popped up here. This is, there were just enough comments last time that it felt like we needed to circle back on that. And then just while we're here, we'll review the other two, consider transportation impacts, and then minimizing the number of students impacted by any adjustments that we make. So given, does that feel like it gave you what you needed, Annie? Annie, did you get what you needed from that? Okay, perfect. I couldn't quite see your face or your thumb. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of commonalities here, over here in this section, about you must be able to bike or walk, right? We've got build community. This is what the school does, right? So I'm going to put some clump some together about how the school behaves. This is kind of in the middle. Neighborhood school is a school that's accessible. Live in the surrounding areas, so that'll come over here. Is representative or looks like the kids in the area. Okay, so it does look like we have some some commonalities coming up around the hard part of the school. So I'm going to remove these schools here around what the school does and how the school behaves, because I think that that is less about the boundaries and more about the institution itself. So I'm going to leave these over here right now. And then we're going to look at these definitions here. And what I would love for you to do, because you all seem to be really savvy in Miro, which is awesome. I want you to pick your top 2 of these definitions. And the way you can do that is if you click on a sticky, you can get to this little emoji face. And then you can add a heart or a thumbs up or whatever you want. But I want you to pick your top 2 of these 8 right here by adding an emoji. And if it feels like the emojis are not working for you, again, use the chat and I'm happy to add them for you. But pick your top 2.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah.
What's the process for getting the emoji? I can't figure it out.
No, that's quite all right. Thanks for asking again. So if you click on a Post-it or sticky here, you'll see this white bar come up. And then you'll see a little smiley face. When you see the smiley face, click on it and you can choose your emoji there.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work, just put your votes in the chat and I'll add them for you.
And Sarah, can you make a school that serves the community within a certain distance?
Yes.
An allowable one?
So if there's someone that has clicked on the bottom blue sticky that says a school that serves a community within a certain defined boundary, if you can click outside of that sticky, that would be helpful because nobody else can get into it right now. I can't quite tell who you are. If you just put a thumbs up on the bottom right sticky. Thank you. Perfect. All right. And Dr. Warren, can you tell me how close I am on time?
It's 5:20, so if we're trying to wrap up around 5:30, you've got 9 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Boyd put something in the chat. He says, builds community and defined by boundary and community at large. Okay. Okay, so we got a lot of votes on this one. Okay, is everybody done voting? Anybody still need to vote? All right, I don't see anybody. Let's see. Okay, let me get one more series of votes here where the kids look like the neighborhood. So we're going to add a vote to that. Kate, I'm adding your votes right now. Neighborhood school is a school that encourages community. I don't see that one. Okay, so I'm now going to move this one out of here. I'm going to move this one out of here. Okay, we're getting closer. This is great. Okay, so of these, so now we're just looking at these top 5 right here. A school that serves the community within a certain defined boundary or travel distance, but also the community at large. So this seems to be the one that people really like. And I'm just curious, so this doesn't have a defined boundary. And I'm curious if people have thoughts about whether or not it needs to be defined in this definition. Yeah, go ahead, Ariel.
I don't know because I don't know exactly how we're going to use this. Like, I think I'm curious if McKay has any thoughts or guidance on this, both in terms of how detailed we need to get on this, and also is there a sort of traditionally accepted definition within the field of neighborhood school?
Awesome question. McKay, you want to respond?
Yes, I can lean in here. I would say that traditionally in other districts, it's defined as a community of mutual interest. So I go from the redistricting background, which is a little bit more in local government. But I think as far as I haven't worked with a district that has actually asked for a definition of it because it's different in each community. But I think these are all leaning towards it. I think it's really up to you all to define what it is. Where it comes into play with mapping would be the natural barriers or walkability or bikeability and how you choose to define a neighborhood school. So I know that that's not a really defined answer because they don't live there. And so it is different. It means different things. It could mean different things to different people in this committee. And so I don't know exactly. It will modify scenarios when we get to that based on what you're highlighting as far as natural barriers, transportation, walkability, those types of things, when you're thinking about actually moving areas from one area to another. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So it seems like it could be ambiguous if we want it to be, or we can make it very specific. I think we haven't talked about, because a lot of our students get to school by the bus, right? And most of these definitions talk about being able to walk to that school or being able to bike to that school. And I just wonder, like, where does the bus or other transportation fit into this definition? If anybody has any thoughts on that.
I'll lean in and just say that that's another very important piece on neighborhood schools and not having to cross busy roads. Like walk zones will be really important if you can walk to a school, but there's a massive highway in between you and that school. Can you really walk to that? Do you feel comfortable, sending a kindergartner by themselves to cross a 4-lane road or not? So I think that those walk zones do come into play, and hazard zones as well.
I think that that's also going to dovetail nicely with the conversation that we're soon to have, where we'll show not only hazard zones and how we've been busing across, roads like that are potentially dangerous, but also crossing guards, and where I think we have some decisions to make about where we want crossing guards to just help students continue to be able to walk, as opposed to busing across a line. And right now, what we realize is we're doing some of both. And it is getting students to what I would consider to be their neighborhood schools, just schools that are relatively close to them, and within our current defined walking zones, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But if this definition of neighborhood schools relates to whether we're busing students or not, that may influence our thinking about, what the what the distance should be that we're asking students to walk.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Warren. Marley, what's your question or thought?
Well, I feel like the post-it that says where the school looks like the kids in the neighborhood is more of like the reality of it, but then the top sticky is more so like a definition of it. But I feel like that one that I said kind of like captures it more. And like I agree with the top one as well, but I think that that's more of a definition, and then the where the school looks like the kids in the neighborhood is more of like what you see if you actually walked into that school.
Mm-hmm. So do you think, Marley, that if you did this, you would get this?
Yeah.
Okay. So then maybe this is like where the school looks like the kids in the neighborhood. Maybe that's more about the way the school behaves, or so if we're able to come up with a definition that says what the school is, that if we do these things, then the school is representative of its neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good point. Thank you for amplifying that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I might make an invitation to us, which is, so I basically just took kind of like two of the big thoughts here and put them in one place so that we have this definition that embodies a school that serves the community within a certain defined boundary or travel distance, but also the community at large, a school that is easily and safely accessible by foot or bike to students. And that I might make an invitation that this is a working definition for right now, and that as we move through this next couple of sections and we get more information, we can make a decision about whether or not we need to get super specific about distance or if we want to leave it ambiguous. With a show of Zoom hands, thank you, Ariel, for the thumbs up. Does that sound like an okay plan for folks? And okay, is that a, hold on, let me check. I can't see everyone's little Zoom faces at the same time. Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, I think I saw mostly thumbs up or hands there. So let's go with that. So this is going to be our working definition for right now, but always we can come back to it because we're not to our recommendations yet. So I think with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Dr. Warren. Thank you all for participating in that, and especially those that were having a little bit of technology trouble. Good work staying with it. All right, Dr. Warren, take it away.
Alrighty. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share our deck if I can. Hopefully. Zoom and I don't always get along, but we'll try. Oops. Come on. All right. Can folks see that okay? Great. So I am joined by my colleagues, Ben Lissavoy and Katie Lamb from our transportation team. And we are really happy to have this opportunity to share a little bit with you about some of the ways that our work around transportation is structured. We're really in the middle right now of doing some of our own analysis and thinking about the best ways to approach things like hazard zones and walking zones and crossing guards. And so this is actually turns out to be a great time and good timing in terms of being able to get some input from all of you. And I think you will see that it sort of connects to pretty closely the conversation around how we end up structuring our, our thinking around our boundaries. So we're going to first just give you a quick snapshot of some of the relevant policies or procedures that affect this work, some ridership data for our students, and then our hazard zones and walk zones. A little bit about our crossing guards and the survey that we've just done with our crossing guard company, and how we're thinking about that in relation to hazard zones. And we will actually steer away from the deck in a few minutes after we've run through some of that, so that we can show you with a somewhat more flexible system how some of these things look in our actual software in Traversa, which is the transportation software. And then Ben has very kindly saved me and helped me create a map of our crossing guard sites because I don't have his tech skills. And so we'll look at that too. And then we'll share a few questions that we would love to have some discussion around and get your input on. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Ben to kick it off with some information.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Ben Lesavoy. I'm the director of transportation. Basically, our PPS policy defines how and when we transport students. So basically, the pre-K students are, how can we explain this the easiest way? They're eligible if they live over a half a mile from school. There's also other considerations if students are special ed students, and it's also considered if they got placement in an out-of-network school, whether or not they are eligible for transportation. Kindergarten students.
Ben, sorry, can I just jump on that one for a quick second? Yeah. Pre-K is a different category than our other grade levels because we don't have pre-K for all 4-year-olds. We have some of the 4-year-olds in the city that attend our classrooms, and it's a process that's done through application and lottery. And so there's a whole process that we go through. And when families apply for one of those slots, they need to check off whether or not they need transportation in order to be able to participate. And so whether or not we actually grant them transportation depends completely on whether or not they check that box on their application. But it is not guaranteed to families that take part in a pre-K program, unlike in the other grades where it's just defined by these other parameters that you'll see.
Yep. Thanks, Sarah. Kindergarten students that live more than a half a mile from school are eligible. Grades 1 through 5 is over a mile. Grades 6 through 8 are over 2 miles. And all of our high school students, other than special ed students, receive a Metro Pass to be transported to school. Special ed students in high school do receive busing if it is in their IEP. And some students qualify for services under McKinney-Vento. And that allows them to be transported from pretty much anywhere because a lot of them move around so frequently. We have students in Gorham, Wyndham, Auburn, Saco, Biddeford, Old Orchard Beach, all over the place right now. So we do provide transportation for them as well.
Ben, let me just add one bit of quick context there because not everyone may be familiar with that aspect of the work. So the McKinney-Vento Act is a federal law that defines how we need to support and work with students whose families are unhoused according to meeting a federal definition. And when a student moves and they are no longer sort of near their regular school, they have the option, if it's in the best interest of the student, to continue to be transported back to what's called the school of origin. And so even if a student is going to school in Portland, but their family moves across the line to Westbrook or Gorham or another town, because that's where they've gotten housing, they still have the right to come back to a Portland school for the remainder of that school year, and if the situation continues, potentially into the following year. So we are jointly responsible with the other district for transporting students in those types of situations. So it's not all unhoused students, but it's students that may be living far away from where they're currently going to school.
So yesterday we did quite a bit of analysis on what our student population is that we bus. Currently, we transport about 2,340 students daily. 1,700 of them walk and 2,200 receive Metro passes. So this number fluctuates on a daily basis depending on enrollments. We bus about 1,900 regular ed students, 174 special ed students, 45 students who are special ed who live out of district, 180 McKinney-Vento students, and 144 pre-K students.
Sorry, just to clarify, the out of district is not that they live out of district, it's that they're going to specialized schools or programs outside of Portland. So we bus as far as Saco, Lewiston, Auburn, just depends on the special ed placement.
Yep.
Sorry, I forgot I was controlling this.
No, you're good. Priscilla, what's your question?
Can you just clarify for me? I had a question around you said 45 students that are special ed living outside of the neighborhood or the district?
So what those students are special ed students that go to schools outside the district. So we transport to like Margaret Murphy School, Sweetser School, Glickman Academy, Maplestone. So they're all students that are Portland students, but because of their needs, they're bused outside the district to special schools.
Okay, so we are responsible to provide transportation to those students as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is where the hazard zones come into play. We bus 736 students that would be walkers, so they don't have to cross major streets. So you can kind of see which schools have the largest hazard zones with the most kids living in them, just strictly by the numbers here. So like Amanda Rose School has a hazard zone basically in Sagamore Village. Well, Sagamore Village is right behind the school. There's 33 students that we currently bus that would be considered walkers based on distance. At East End, there's 247 students. So, once we start getting into, downtown, our hazard zones are closer to the schools, and a lot of those kids would be considered walkers. But because of the hazard zones, the numbers go up on who we bus. So 247 at East End, 83 at Lyseth, only 8 at Ocean Ave because the hazard zone is so small for Ocean Avenue, which you'll see soon. 51 at Presumpscot, 181 at Reiki School, 64 at King, and 69 at Lincoln. Like I said, you'll see that basically our schools downtown have the largest hazard zones and have the greatest population of students in a small area geographically. So our first slide is on East End and Reiki's hazard zone. So basically what you'll see here is, for example, at Reiki, we have a hazard zone that's bordered on the east by Forest Avenue, on the south by Congress Street, on the north by Park Avenue, and then there's a small section between St. John and Valley Street that is also considered a hazard zone. So when Sarah also shows you the crossing guards, you'll kind of see where the overlap is, because we do have crossing guards on Congress Street that allows students to walk from the hazard zone, but we also bus them from the hazard zone, right? So at East End, similar, but we only have 2 crossing guards over there. But you can kind of see the population of the students on the map, Kennedy Park and whatnot, anywhere east or west of Washington Ave over to Franklin Street, south of Cumberland and Congress Street are considered hazard zones. I'd like to mention that, anybody who's walked around Portland, that neighborhood around Munjoy Hill is very walkable. And we have a lot of kids that reside in that area around East End. All right, next.
Could we actually go back to that last slide? Just as I'm still learning how to read these images, could you just talk us through what do the different colors mean? And where's the hazard zone on the left image there?
Yeah, so I know it's our transportation software isn't great at being able to screenshot these and pull the information out. When we have time again to traverse and show you live, then it'll make a little more sense. But basically, if you're looking at this at East End, if you can kind of see just on the bottom left, you see Franklin Street. If you follow, you kind of see a line that's a little darker in color. That would be your line for the hazard zone. On the inside, on that triangle, that's the northern part. That's your pre-K and K and your 1 through 5 walk. Because East End has basically the entire area that, is covered by that school for enrollment is basically a hazard zone, right? The area for the walking and the pre-K and K and 1 through 5 is a lot smaller than you'll see for any other school. But
so Ben, just to clarify, so again, the shaded kind of pinkish area with the red line around it, that's the hazard zone. And then the area inside that's the cutout at the top middle is what the walk zone would be, right?
Yeah.
With the up to 0.5 miles away and then up to 1 mile away. But then I want to make sure we're clear, we're even transporting students within that inner box, or are those students actually walking?
So there's one section at Cumberland and North Street where we have a bus stop. So that's a few blocks from school, but it's just right inside the hazard zone. So kids get bused from that location. But pretty much, if you're looking at the map, if you look at the bold line on there, it's hard for me. I'm pointing at the screen, but that doesn't mean anything to anybody. But the bold line about
Can you see my cursor?
Yep, a little bit up. Yep.
This one?
Yeah, so that's Cumberland Ave and Congress Street. To the left is Washington Avenue. Yep. And then you can see Franklin Street is the other border of the hazard zone. And if you keep following that along, you get to 4th Street and you follow that north to Eastern Prom, and that is your hazard zone for East End. So you can see the majority of the students at East End are bused because of where the population density is and where the hazard zones are, right? So.
And just one note, unfortunately, we're going to figure this out.
And I guess I should clarify as well. Each dot or pin on the screen is a student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we haven't yet been able to overlay the crossing guards with this. That's where we're trying to get to. But Ben was mentioning that we are busing students from the intersection of Cumberland and North Street. And that's one of those situations where we're realizing, oh, well, we also have a crossing guard right there. So are we busing them, or are they walking and we're paying for a crossing guard? So that's the kind of sort of duplication that we're trying to figure out, which is our preference. Are we more into letting them walk and making sure there's a crossing guard, or are we going to bus them and maybe save the money on the crossing guards because we're busing everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Lauren has a question. Go ahead, Lauren.
They're meaning by the color of the dots. Some are blue, some are green.
Not
There is, Ben.
necessarily.
Yeah, the color of the dots indicate the grade level that the students are at. So you'll see the dots are a household, so there may be multiple children there, or it may be an apartment building with many students there. But the various colors designate what schools they go to. If you wanted to ask me which color is which, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And then
to answer
one other
Priscilla's
question. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ben.
question, I am not sure how often the hazard zones are evaluated. I've been here since March, and we haven't evaluated them. But I
Been here
can't
since
tell you-
August of last year, and I inherited them, and I suspect they've been in place for quite a long time. It's part of what we're trying to figure out is we inherited the walk zones and, or the policies. We inherited the hazard zones, and we inherited the location of the crossing guards. And we're realizing now that all of those things don't necessarily still make sense, and they don't all necessarily align. And that's why we're in the midst of trying to make it all make sense and figure out how they all should go together.
Mhm.
Priscilla, do you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
Yeah, so the reason why I asked that is because so 2 years, I think only 2 years ago, last year and this year is when we were able to get Parkside transportation to Reiki. But my question is, was that a inner district policy, like we just decided to do it, or whenever those changes are made, how official are those changes being recorded so we can continue to provide those transportation to that neighborhood and create that as a safety, as a hazard zone? You know what I'm saying? Like, are we just doing
So
this here, or are we making it official?
the boundaries of the hazard zones are actually defined in the procedures that go together with the board policy on transportation. And what we've realized is that those are not up to date. They're not in sync with what's actually being used right now either. So, I mean, the procedures don't technically require the board to vote. We could just change them and talk with the board about it, but they are not aligned at this point either. So we're not, because we weren't here, we're not totally sure how that process played out before, when it was changed, but we know that it is no longer aligned to what's on our board page. So we should update that. We plan to update it, but we need to figure out what the plan is.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you for all of those tangents we took you on.
No, it's great.
Yeah. So Presumpscot has 51 students and Ocean Ave only has 8 students in hazard zones. Presumpscot has 2 hazard zones. The first one is basically west of Ocean Ave and north of Washington Avenue. The second one that you'll see at the bottom is our second hazard zone. And it's kind of outlined in blue. That's south of Washington Avenue. And you can kind of see Presumpscot Elementary School behind the PK and K text right there.
Yeah, the school is here.
Yeah, so basically,
here.
Yeah, so we were trying not to let students cross over Washington Ave. But I will also say that we do have a crossing guard at Presumpscot and Washington Ave, and we also bus students across the street as well. For Ocean Avenue School, it is just that small triangle at the bottom left-hand side. So anything southwest of Forest Avenue right there, that is the hazard zone for Ocean Ave. So it's small. Not a lot of students live in that area, so that's why there's only 8 students there.
And I think just to go back to the question about colors, I think that the blue indicates the elementary and the green would be the middle school. Does that sound right, Katie? And that's why we would be busing them, because they're probably, 2 miles, more than 2 miles from their middle school.
Right. And there are separate hazard zones for the middle schools. So that there may be elementary and middle school kids in these areas as well.
So Lyseth has 83.
Real quick, Ben.
Oh, go
Ariel
ahead.
has a question. Go ahead, Ariel.
Yep.
Thanks. Sorry, could you go back one slide? Oops. I'm just curious. Oh, that was 2. I was curious about the Ocean Ave. So where you only have 8 students in a hazard zone for Ocean Ave, do you typically have to like dedicate a whole bus for that, or are you able to somehow kind of fold that in with other busing you're already doing and kind of maximize the use of resources?
Yeah, we folded it. We just run a bus through there that's already over there, because most of the buses, like the hazard zones, are basically notated for students that live, for example, within a mile of Ocean Ave Elementary. So the bus is actually going further away, so it's coming back through the hazard zone. So we pick them up then.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. So at King, we have 64 students that are living in hazard zones. In Lincoln, we have 69. So King is anywhere north of Franklin Street, bordered by Washington Ave to the east, 295 to the north, and 4th Street to the southeast. Yeah, I think we skipped a slide there, Sarah. If you want to go back up, there we go. So Amanda Rowe, the hazard zone is basically anywhere south of
Brighton.
that Brighton Ave. Yeah, and then I thought Rowe had a hazard zone over at Sagamore as well for some reason. Katie, am I correct in that? Isn't there a hazard zone at Sagamore also?
I thought there was. I'm trying to look right now.
Sorry, I
The
think
school is
I think
here.
it was one of the. I think this is one of the ones that was added with Motel 6, which has been 2 to 3 years. So it's one of the things that Sarah was saying, that it's probably not. It's in a district decision, but it was created once families started to be placed at Motel 6.
Yeah. Thanks. Looks like we're eating up the time, so I'll try and roll through these. Lyseth, you can kind of see the hazard zone is somewhat of an interesting shape there, but basically that's Allen Ave extension where the cursor is right now. So anybody southeast of Allen Ave extension and west of Washington Avenue, yep, in that area, they are all eligible for busing, even though they live close enough to school to walk. You can go to the next. Oh,
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
yeah.
Let me go back one. There.
Yep. So we kind of went through the King already, and then Lincoln, they have 2 hazard zones. So basically for Lincoln, it's all along that Brighton Ave or Forest Ave. I'm sorry, on both sides of the street, and then the other one there is on the right is your. I can't see my notes that I put on there, but can you see them, Sarah? The notes?
Speaker notes? No.
No. Okay. But basically north of Brighton Ave and east of I-95.
And it is those Lincoln Middle School students in Sagamore Village that are in a hazard area. So it is the students going to Lincoln, not Rowe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Katie.
So, and we'll, spend a few minutes, if we can, looking at this in the software, but I think you kind of get the idea of how this is laid out. And let me just kind of quickly run through the situation with the crossing guards. Oh, sorry.
There's a couple of questions. I think for the schools that we didn't see, will we get to see those at some point? And then Rob, go ahead and ask your question.
These are actually all the schools that have hazard zones. Any school that's not on here does not have a hazard zone.
Huh, interesting. Okay, so I guess that's...
Yeah, that was my question. I was wondering about... Yeah, I was curious about Talbot and Lemon Moore.
Yeah, so neither of those have any hazard zones attached to them.
Huh.
Talbot has a crossing guard right there at the entrance to the school on Forest Avenue. And Moore has, at the moment anyway, we've got the crossing guard that does the Lyseth crossing right there on the corner of, at that point, it's not Washington anymore, it's Auburn Street, right at the entrance to the Lyseth and Moore School driveway. So there's a guard there and they do both shifts. They stay for the Moore run. And that's a question that, I've been debating with the crossing guard company that folks should weigh in on too, probably, is whether or not it's actually, like, do we need this for the middle school students? There's a light there, it's a fairly visible intersection. So those are the types of things we're sort of wrestling with.
And I'll just throw in there real quick. Me and Katie were actually looking at that one today together. And she mentioned that there's actually a walking path directly across from Moore and Lyseth that runs into the neighborhood where the hazard zone is. So we do have the crossing guard crossing students, and we also are busing students into the hazard zone. So this has been very interesting to start figuring out.
Was there another question?
I saw Kate just came off of mute. Kate, did you have a question? No. Okay. No, I think we're covered. I think people are just curious where the other schools were. So we're ready to talk about crossing guards.
Okay. So the crossing guards apparently in years past were run in various ways at points along the way by the city, by the police department. And, these models vary across cities in the country. Somewhere along the way, it was like the hot potato that got passed to the school district. I'm not sure when exactly, but what we inherited as a team was this agreement with the crossing guard company, which we actually renegotiated this year down. They were looking for a fairly major increase up to $580 something thousand. So we held the contract at $400. We removed 3 sites in the West End where I had them do a survey last spring and there were no students. We were just crossing seemingly people who were working at Maine Med, who were very, I think happy to say hi to the crossing guard, but they didn't probably need that support. So at this stage, we've got 24 guards, and we are looking at those locations to try to figure out if those are still the right locations. And in a second, I can show you, we had them do another survey so we have 3 days worth of data from October on how many students were crossing. And that's helping us think about where we should and shouldn't have folks. But it has to be overlaid with this whole conversation around the hazard zones, because it may be that in some situations we actually want to add a guard maybe and stop busing as many kids. We're not sure of that yet. So it varies pretty dramatically from one site to one intersection to another, how many students are crossing. So a place like King Middle School and the intersection there at Park Street and Deering Ave is extremely busy, whereas some of the smaller intersections in other parts of town and the neighborhoods are quite low. So some of the things we're thinking about are removing guards. So we've got places where there are 8 or fewer students crossing. maybe as few as 2 or 3. We've talked about adding guards in some places, maybe to encourage walking and reduce busing, and then potentially adding guards if there are intersections of concern. So we did actually this year add a guard near Rose School because that was a request from the community, and I went over and walked it with a community member and now a board member, actually, and our principal, and they had suggested a few different locations, but we picked the one that we thought was the highest priority near the school. So, we're trying to be flexible and responsive to what is most needed. And I'm just going to show you the questions that we're hoping to talk about before we kind of move away from the slides for a couple minutes. I want to make sure we leave time for discussion, but I will at least show you just so you get a sense of what the crossing guard map looks like, as well as just a quick scan of the survey. So things that we're thinking about that we'd love input on are around, do we even get the hazard zones right? Are there places that shouldn't be hazard zones or places that should be that we've missed? Would we want to potentially have more crossing guards and less busing? Would that be desirable? Or we could flip it and say the other way around. We'd rather have more busing and fewer guards. And if we changed our walker policy, that's something we've talked about quite a lot. I think, for some of us that are engaging in this regularly, and then some families that we've talked to, there are concerns raised about half a mile being pretty far for a case student to walk, or a mile being far for especially the younger elementary, and a middle school student having to walk 2 miles can be, pretty far, especially in the winter time and depending on where they live. So, I think that's a debate that the community needs to have around whether those distances are appropriate or not. And then there's also conversation that we need to continue to have around whether we would potentially want to move students at the middle school level onto Metro, like our high school students do. So these are all things that we're sort of chewing on. So let me take that down. Just quickly give you a sense of the map here with the crossing guards. So you get a feel for it with the little red dots. Oops. You don't want to be in South Portland. All right. So it's interesting. Whoa, interesting if you see the West End here. You see a big concentration of crossing guards, which is fascinating because most of the West End is also a hazard zone. And then the East End, we've got 2 guards, and most of the East End is a hazard zone where we're busing the students. So again, we inherited this, and we don't know all the history behind how these things were created, but it's not consistent, in the East and the West Ends. So those are some decisions we need to make around how we want to kind of balance hazard zones versus and busing versus walking and crossing guards. Up here by Presumpscot, as Ben mentioned, we've got this person who stands right at the corner of, clicking on the wrong one, Washington Ave and Presumpscot Street, and then one that's closer to the school. And that Washington and Presumpscot one is just an interesting question because we are already busing the students on the other side of Washington. So do we need the crossing guard there, or do we need the hazard zone? Over here, there are just 2 near Ocean Ave. And as Ben mentioned, we bus in a small number of students to Ocean, but a lot of the kids around there actually do walk, so probably benefit from those crossing guards. And then here you can see this is around Longfellow. So our students at Longfellow have that support. Stevens Ave is quite busy. So that's, probably appropriate. And then this one is alongside of the high school, Leland Ave. So in that area. So 3, generally speaking, that effectively serve Longfellow. They don't really serve Lincoln Middle School, but as Ben noted, there are quite a few students who are bused to Lincoln because of the hazard zone for them. And then this is the one that we added for Rowe. And then if we go up, oops, where are they? We've got one for Talbot right on Forest Ave by the fire station there. One that stands just outside the drive into Lyseth and Moore. One that's at sort of the slightly, I live right in this area, so I can attest to the fact that this is a slightly tricky place, probably appropriate for students who are walking from this whole neighborhood and then crossing over to get to most of them are probably taking the walking path behind the school. This one is one that we're wondering about if this is really necessary at Sumac and Summit. It's got quite a low number of students crossing, but it's probably a debate to be had because there are students who are walking from this area. So that gives you a bit of a feel. And then really fast, and actually I will share this with you all, but this is what the survey looks like. So they took each school and each of the intersections where we've got a guard standing, and then they, for each morning and afternoon, arrival and dismissal time, 3 days in a row, they clocked how many students were crossing at each of those points. So some, as you can see, are, a handful, and then some, here you go with that King, Deering Ave, and Park, you've got 94 kids crossing. So the differences are relatively significant. And so that's the data that we're sort of looking at to try to figure out what might make sense. And I don't want to dwell on this for too long because I want to make sure we have time for discussion. So, and I think we can open up Traversa and look at that if it's helpful to come back to it. But I'd rather just make sure that we at least start talking.
Dr. Warren, really quickly, students that live in a hazard zone, what is the messaging that they get about transportation? Like, are they told that they have to ride a bus and they can't walk, or what? How do families know that they're meant to be, or maybe they're not meant to be, but like what does that mean for a family if they're in a hazard zone?
It's a really good question. I don't think that, as far as I know, Ben and Katie, if you think this is different, tell me. I don't know that they're specifically explicitly told that they're in a hazard zone. I think they just receive their bus assignment like other people do. Is anyone else here aware of any different messaging that's ever gone out?
I think that is the message, and I think that also creates a lot of conflicts because sometimes there is a bus stop for that hazard zone, but then the street right next to it is not considered a hazard zone, and that parent is looking for transportation and they can't get it. Yeah. So it's really hard to explain to that family why they can't get it. And we also, like, when I say we, like, if it comes to me, I don't have access to know what is the hazard zone. So it's also hard for me to understand and give that information to the parent unless if I call transportation and I ask.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to say, just from a school point of view, we just get a list of students and their bus stops. So I don't think there is any sort of communication that, you can't walk. And as the kids get older, sometimes they walk on their own, and parents give them that permission.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put I can figure it out. Well, maybe I can't get the slides back up. Hold on. So, I mean, as I work and just struggle with the technology, the first questions are just around the hazard zones. Are there places that you feel like shouldn't be hazard zones, should be hazard zones that we're missing, which is obviously related to the question of whether or not we'd actually rather have less territory in hazard zones, but maybe just more supports for students walking. Looks like Rob. Is that a new hand, Rob?
And Dr. Warren,
Yeah,
I'll take notes if you want to call on people.
Okay, I'm trying to actually project the slide, so let me see if I can accomplish that or not. I just want people to be able to see the questions.
But go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I think we probably should be where we're located, which is just the other side of Morrill's Corner, just south of Morrill's Corner. I feel like it should be a hazard zone for Lyman Moore, which is our assigned middle school. We're about like 1.7 miles away, but it wasn't caught, I guess, in the data.
So can you say, so right around Morrill's Corner?
Yeah, we're on Waverly Street.
Yeah. So having to cross over that messy intersection around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Katie and I were looking at that one today. It's like the southwest side of, I'd say, like where Warren Ave, Forest Ave, Allen Ave all meet.
Yeah.
And there's just like literally no good way to walk through that.
And there's a train track running through it. It's one of the worst intersections in the city.
Yeah.
Train track, lots of cars. Not ideal.
Awful. I hate driving through there. I try not to.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, that's a great note. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Priscilla. You there, Priscilla?
You're muted.
You're on mute.
Sorry. So right now, the most concerns that I'm getting from families are usually coming for Talbot schools. So it was interesting to see that there's no hazard zones for that school. So that makes sense where the concerns are coming, but it's mostly on Forest Ave. Especially there's a section where Scarbadub and McDonald is. So I have, and it's coming from families, and it's also coming from community members such as churches, pastors. We have quite a few churches. They are often offering some type of shelters to families. So that is the whole Forest Ave. Has been really a big concern for families. I'm not from Portland, so I don't know how safe it is, to be very honest with you, but it's just things that comes to me and I'm trying to voice. And the other one was going to King, and it's families that are concerned to walk underneath over the pass of the highway. So I think it affects mostly families that lives on Lasso Street. So those are the two locations that it's often coming up to me.
Okay. I was just going to look up. I'm curious about, because what you're describing is basically students coming from Morrill's Corner up to Talbot. I would have thought that would be covered just by the mile rule, but maybe that's not quite a mile.
Princeton Pines is also another issue, that they don't get transportation to Talbot. And that has always been like a big challenge.
Okay.
Yeah, Sarah, the cutoff point for walking is right just as you get past the Morrill's Corner intersection. So once you get into Morrill's Corner, that's busing. But once you cross over, then it's not busing anymore. That's a walk area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a good one to look at. Damon?
Yeah, so I guess I'd say, with only a few exceptions, the entire city probably could be considered a hazard zone. Really, with we just really need to do a much better job with bicycle pedestrian safety across the board in this whole country, really. But I think it's worth noting that the city has started looking at adopting a Vision Zero policy, which is essentially a policy that says we're going to really focus on having zero bicycle pedestrian fatalities in the city, and the city is working on adopting a new transportation master plan. So I think it's good to think about some of that stuff that's happening in the wider context here, looking at improving safety especially for bicyclists, pedestrians, other vulnerable users in the city. And essentially I think what we're looking at here is kind of triaging the worst of the worst kind of areas of unsafe pedestrian infrastructure. So I would favor. I don't think busing is the best way forward, though. I think it's kind of admitting defeat, and I think we should focus on the walkability of the city, and that is consistent with other goals that the city is working on, especially with the new transportation master plan. So I think that the additional crossing guards is a good stopgap as we work toward really making everything a whole lot safer, especially at our intersections. So I think that would be the best way to go moving forward, and it would be more consistent with kind of where we're trying to go in the wider context.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you. Kate?
Yeah, just a piece of feedback. Sarah, you had commented on the Summit Street Lyseth crossing that I can't remember the cross street. It's not Brentwood, but that is one I think has gotten a lot better. I could see taking a guard out there and moving them somewhere else. I believe it's the city has put up sort of cones or posts in the middle of Summit on those. And in my mind, that has slowed people down a lot in that section of Summit, allowing kids to cross. So to the degree you're looking at, resource reallocation, that would be one I could see. And I noticed the numbers were kind of reflective that, maybe possible to move somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. That one was one of those ones where it was can't do all the screens at once, but a handful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there other hands I'm not seeing? I've got other things open on my screen.
Sarah, there's a question in the chat that may be too big for us to talk about today, but just looking at the workforce availability as we're looking at this, as whether we're looking at adding more bus drivers or more crossing guards, do we have the resources that we'll be able to pull from to be able to pull it off?
Right.
That was from Ariel.
It's a really important question. We really struggle to get crossing guards. And we also struggle to get bus drivers. So it's all challenging. But I would say, honestly, at the moment, we're probably doing better on bus drivers than crossing guards. But we have all of our crossing guard sites staffed at this stage. But it hasn't always been easy. If I don't know that any of the things we're talking about right now would add too much in the way of strain on the bus, system and drivers. But, there are things we could do that would do that, and that could potentially be a challenge. Kate, is that a new hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask because there's so many areas of the city sort of, I don't know. Do we ever sort of overlay information from the city, from Portland PD around accident reports, intersections that they notice in particular cause a lot of problems or they got called to? It'd just be interesting to make sure that we're somehow integrating that when we're looking at these zones and making sure those spots are covered if they're adjacent enough to a school.
We haven't done that yet in the current sort of administration, but I'm not sure if that might have been done in the past when the original, when the zones were created, but it's absolutely a great point. Are there other thoughts? Damon expressed, some opinion around this, but in terms of, busing versus walking, where we make investments to potentially try to increase walkability or continue busing?
I do think that the walking guideline for middle schoolers is too high. Like when we're trying to increase or decrease chronic absenteeism and getting middle schoolers to school in the middle of the winter, having to walk 2 miles is a lot. And I would really like to see us bring that down.
Yeah. Just for the middle school, are you feeling like that's different than the elementary? You're okay with that one?
I feel Well, I'm basing it on my own experience because we walk that every day, and it seems to be okay for my family. But I'm not sure. I most care about the middle school one coming down.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see, Annie.
Yeah, I feel like perhaps I'm out of swim class. This is like so classic, like crazy parent right now. I feel like that question puts a little bit the cart before the horse because you know, depending on what boundaries are ultimately adopted and what kids need to go to what schools will ultimately drive whether we need buses. Because if we do lean towards more redistributing people based on different demographics, then we're going to necessarily need more buses.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't ask that question very well. You're totally right about that part. I was talking more about where we need to make some decisions about whether we're leaning more towards investing in sort of, you know, crossing guards or maybe other measures to make it possible for students to walk, that we may be busing out of a hazard zone right now. Would we prefer to just keep busing them from the hazard zone, or would we prefer to maybe add crossing guards and make it easier for them to cross the dangerous streets that we're currently busing over? You're right that where the zones are could change a little bit potentially depending on how we choose to.
Got it. Okay, that makes more sense. I guess my response to that though is I think in some sense it's a cultural thing because I will see some families walking great distances and some families waiting for the bus very close to school, and and so it kind of becomes. I think there just needs to be more data on around who is using these buses and why.
Yep, great point. Priscilla, I see you, but I want to make sure I give Marley a chance to say something. So, Marley, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so it was said in the chat and said before, but I was just wondering if necessarily I support giving middle school students a Metro pass, but only if that meant that there would be more buses, because I go to Deering High and I take the Metro to school sometimes, and the buses are already really full. So I feel like if we were to add middle schoolers to it, we would need more buses. So I feel like that would be a good idea, but only if we can add more buses. But if we can't add more buses, then I don't know how well that would really work just because of how it is right now.
That's such a good point. We have had just very, I wouldn't even say conversations, very initial exploration last year with Metro, and they feel they could do this to add the middle schoolers to the Metro system. They would need to add buses, and they would even need to add a route or two probably to cover certain areas that aren't really covered right now. But it's very helpful and interesting to hear about your experience on the buses going to Deering, because that may be something we need to address with them too. Okay, Priscilla.
Have the district ever talked about the possibility of having this for elementary age school, the same walking distance to eliminate or to reduce the barriers for families that have multiple age kids? So if they have a K and they have a first, they must be at the bus stop to have the K ride the bus, but they also need to walk with a first grader. Have the district ever really looked into that?
Do you mean having the kindergartners, this distance be the same limit for the kindergartners as the 1st to 5th grade?
Yeah, and I don't know. I really don't know how to feel about this, but I'm just looking at like families that have multiple age kids and that must be in two places at the same time, you know?
Yeah. I don't know. I have no sense of how this has all been handled in the past. Boyd?
Well, I thank you for saying that, Priscilla, because yeah, that is a chronic issue as far as like when you talk about attendance and things, is kids, the distance piece becomes a problematic for families with, like a fourth or fifth, an older kid and then a younger sibling. When pre-K was on separate buses, it was a nightmare, but just a way to sort of differentiate that there might be multiple kids. And some have that mile that they have to walk, but the other child is allowed busing. I know the buses are full already almost every single one of our buses. We have 5, I think 6. But it is a hardship for families.
Yeah. Boyd, in your experience, do some of the families just decide to have their kindergartner walk with the other kids?
No, typically they'll just end up having to walk the child themselves and they're just late for school but as winter comes, just because we are on the hill and you have to go up Fox Street or North Street, the prom, excuse me, they might not come to school. Yeah. Because of the weather piece. So it does, you start seeing our attendance is going to increase. Absences are going into the weather. And I think it's like if you miss the bus, the distance is such that that kids just stay home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a great point too, about needing to kind of overlay this with our attendance data. Lauren.
Yeah, I wanted to, I guess too, like however the map shakes out, what I found interesting was, right, those folks who are really close, they're in a hazard zone, but they're really close to the school. And so I wonder too, if there's a possibility of like just putting a distance parameter for those kids who essentially live like around the corner, but they're in the hazard zone that are typically busing, so that then we can promote walkability and promote a crossing guard in those instances. Just so that like we're promoting, safety and kind of to Damon's point earlier, just like overall ability to like more sustainable approaches and like more walkability, and guess kind of like hopefully promoting families like having more trust in like our public transportation institutions as well. But yeah, I think that kind of what I'm like leaning towards, I guess. And then the other point is there an opportunity? I know we've talked about weather and like absenteeism. Is there an opportunity, like if we do promote walkability in some of these hazard zones and have maybe more guards in place instead of busing kids, is there a cost savings to like only busing during like the winter time to like for certain students?
Maybe it could be hard in terms of staffing because we don't have seasonal drivers really. I don't know. We could look at that. I'm not sure if we could swing that, but I think we should be looking at everything, right? There's probably no perfect solution to any of this, but obviously safety is the top priority, and we want to make sure we're being responsive to community needs. So I can't. Rob, go ahead.
I would add that I'm sort of leaning towards more walking options as well. But in terms of seasonality, we walk along Stevens Ave and there are days where there's just too much ice and snow buildup to even safely walk on the sidewalk there. So I think that might be a factor as well, especially in the winter months.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And the sidewalk clearance, is done by our friends and partners at the city. Yeah, that can be a challenge.
Thank you, Ariel, for pointing out. Sarah, we're already at the end of our time.
And this was so helpful. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Copious notes.
Beautiful. And so this is super helpful. And again, we're just building our knowledge bank for then starting to see scenarios very soon. So I just appreciate for those of you that email with questions and ask for more information. You do have a Google Drive now, which Superintendent Scallon sent out. and we'll try to get the agenda out a little bit sooner for the next meeting. We with the elections and kind of everything happening in the school board, it was just running a little bit behind. But next month should be better. So feel free to just reach out with any questions, and we will see you in December.